This meeting of the Town Council, Wednesday, April 29th, 2020. We're meeting via telecommunications pursuant to our State of Rhode Island Executive Order 2025, dated April 15th, 2020. And we're meeting as a result of the emergency order issued by the President of the United States, emergency order issued by the Governor of Rhode Island, and under the emergency orders issued by the Town of New Shoreham. Because we're doing this this format, the participants that will be in the list I read will be able to participate. If anyone would like to add any comments or send any comments to us during the meeting, you can email to townclerk@new-shoreham.com. That's townclerk@new-shoreham.com, and Molly Fitzpatrick will try and get it to me. I'll make a note that present and participating in the meeting itself, besides myself, will be Andre Boudreau, second warden, Martha Ball, Sven Rissom, and Chris Willie, all town councilors. Interim town manager Jim Kern, town clerk Molly Fitzpatrick, town solicitor Catherine Marola, EMA directors Bill McComb, Peter Gemp, and Chief Vin Carlone, building official Mark Tilson, harbor master Kate McConville, medical director Dr. Mark Clark, and future medical director Tom Warcup. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. It's being, I believe the meeting is being streamed via the Town of New Shoreham YouTube channel also, as well as the streaming that's being done by the Block Island Times. We thank them for that. Under Warden's report, I'll just have a brief comment in that the weather's starting to change and things are starting to open up. And that makes what we're doing here even more important as people start thinking about coming to the island for whatever reason. So it's very important that we have a good discussion this afternoon. I'm sure we will. I thank everyone for their input and for their work that leading up to this meeting. And let's get started. First item on the agenda is announce the hiring of police officer Sarah Goodwin. I'd like to pass this along to Vin Carlone, Chief Vin Carlone. Chief, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great. Would you like to take the podium, Chief?
Sure. Yes, we've hired Sarah Goodwin, a lifelong Rhode Island, Smithfield, Rhode Island resident. She's 26 years old. She's in the Army National Guard. She's been deployed overseas. She's received 4 commendations as a soldier. She's very, very highly regarded in the academy. I actually had the opportunity to go and watch her physical fitness test out, which is quite a thing. Upwards to 3 and 4 people, engaging her in combat at once. And she is a very, very tough girl and a nice girl and smart. 3-time state champion, tennis champion in her high school. And as I said, very highly regarded, very good candidate. And we're going to start her training this week on Friday. She'll be coming over to the island.
That's great. Chief, thank you very much. We certainly welcome her and look forward to having her as part of the island force. And
thank you.
We welcome her. We'll look forward to meeting her. Just remind everybody to turn your cell phone ringers off, please, if you're on the if you're a participant. Any questions or comments from the council at this point? Okay. Next item on the agenda is report from the harbor master on the process for shellfish license sales. Kate McConville, are you there?
Yes, I am, sir.
Great, thank you, Kate. Would you like to fill us in?
Sure. So, as I emailed all of you, some of you may or may not know that we have the system where you bring your old license from the year prior and we hole punch it. So this year, everyone is going to need new licenses because the last year on the card was 2020. Golden and resident shellfish licenses expire on May 15th. I just completed the update with the IT people, and next week I will set up specific office hours where people can call in, and as long as they are in the system, they can pay over the phone, and I will send their license and our updated regulations. I would like to move the office mid-June to our seasonal office at the boat basin. That will keep people away from town hall. And again, the office hours, we'll post them on the town hall website, the bulletin, and our social media site.
Okay.
Anything else?
Anyone have any questions?
One other thing I'd like to add is per the state and town regulations, the inner ponds will be closing to shellfish May 23rd to October 15th.
Well, that's a fine birthday gift. Thanks, Kate. Just kidding. Any further comments or questions for Kate?
Yeah, I'll have one.
Andre, go ahead.
Kate, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
How's it going out there in the harbor? Have you got any boats? Anything going on?
I had an incident with a family yesterday who were not happy about the emergency town ordinance. The police got involved. And that's all I'm going to say on that matter. I have one other individual who is quarantined out on his boat. I go and check on him every few days, and he is in full compliance. There are a few boats at Bimini that have come in. They're flying their quarantine flag, and everyone else is obeying the rules. So no problems so far, except that one yesterday.
All right. Thank you.
Henderson?
Yeah, I think we can either discuss it now or after, but I do think it is indicative, the situation Kate was talking about, is to how many Rhode Islanders probably aren't fully aware of the unique Block Island conditions. And as we go through the meeting, one of the potential follow-ups is, should we make sure the communication to Rhode Island is very clear, that it's not just like going from Narragansett to North Kingston. It's different when you come to Block Island, and the expectation should be different. So later or whenever you want, Ken, but I think communication about our ordinances probably should be communicated out to the state.
Chris Willie?
Isn't there a shelter-in-place order still in effect in Rhode Island?
Yeah.
That says all Rhode Island residents are required to stay home unless traveling to work, traveling for medical treatment, or obtaining necessities? So how is coming to Block Island for a day trip a necessity? I'm just curious. That's what the order is right now. So what other education do we need? Never mind the quarantine in place. I mean, people are showing up. Ken, you and I were down at the marina today, or I was across at the other marina, but a boat came in today with 2 people on it.
Yep.
Looking for takeout food.
Yep.
Never mind our quarantine order. Why are they out? It's supposed to be shelter in place.
Yeah, it's the same problem the governor's having on the mainland. She tells everybody to stay home, and she drives around, and she sees more people at the box stores and stuff like that.
Well, I understand that, but I think, when it comes to, as the weather gets nicer, we're going to see more and more boats, and
Yeah.
Kate's going to need the assistance from any entity that she can. And I know it wasn't given to her yesterday. So if we have to start calling the DEM or the state police, I think we do. Because it's going to get more problematic. I was shocked to see how many boats were. I mean, while we were putting in docks, 3 new boats showed up.
Yeah.
Ken?
It's that time of year.
Jim Kern?
Ken, yeah, I reached out to the chief of the enforcement at DEM. I've participated in a number of calls that involved the forward-looking management of allowing access to recreational areas. And I will be having, we didn't connect today, but I will be having a conversation with the chief about essentially what Chris was talking about, the extent to which people are allowed to use their boats to go places and marinas in Rhode Island, make sure that our understanding is lining up with what their regulations are. and also to communicate. I believe they do know, but if there's, as Sven said, any role in communicating what the expectation is out here on Block Island. I think, and this is probably better for the next agenda item, but I think there's a perception similar to people coming out, as we've seen and will see, people coming out to either to property that they own, that even though, as I stated more than a month ago, that governors had restrictions on movement, I think that obviously has affected plenty of people, and they're staying put. There are other people that see it as their option to come out here to property they own or come out here using a boat. So those are all things we're going to have to reconcile into restraining people in the present, kind of the present regime, and then any forward consideration, because I think, as a number of people have stated, as the weather gets better, this has been something that, as I said to Kate today, has been complied with at a very high level, although it's just been a small number of people. We're moving into a different set of circumstances, both in the harbor and just visitors of the type I just described. Thanks.
Chris, was that you?
Just one more point. If you look at what's happening in other states, particularly when it comes to outdoor recreation, and basically the reaction like a lot of the governors are having, you could look at what happened in Massachusetts this week and the restriction that they put on recreational fishing and for hire fishing and basically everything on the water. Those are the types of things that we have to look at as the weather gets better, to what Jim said.
Yeah.
The more people that participate, the bigger chance it is that it's going to get shut down.
Right, it's a catch-22. All right, any other comments or questions from anyone participating on that? All right. Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome.
Take care. Next item is to discuss and act on the next steps of COVID-19 health, safety, and welfare management by the town of New Shoreham. Anyone like to start the discussion? Sven?
Ken?
Martha, go ahead. So hold on, Sven.
Am I up? Okay, I just want to say a couple of things. There seems to be some, just as a broad statement, there seems to be some lack of understanding, and I know we've talked about it, I think it's very clear at the council table, but it doesn't seem to be out in the public, that, and Kathy, if I'm misstating this, please correct me, we can be more restrictive than the state, but we cannot be less restrictive.
That's correct.
So whatever the governor, whatever comes down from upstate is basically the minimum of restriction. And we cannot say, oh, the governor said this, but we're saying this, we're having if she says 50, we're saying 75. We cannot do that. And I've seen several comments that people, that doesn't seem to have been made terribly, terribly clear. And I would also just really, really hope we can keep focused on this today and not, I felt like we were really meandering at the last meeting. And just to stay focused. Thanks.
We will try, Martha. Thank you. Sven Riesem?
So I distributed, and hopefully everybody had a chance to at least skim it, a couple of pieces of planning frameworks or templates. And for those in the audience, it's on our website. And I know Molly has made it available. There's really, the first one, I think, helps a lot of the businesses and people, and I'm proposing this, so this is just my thinking, very, very, totally mine. But I think I'd love to debate the concept and the need for and the help of a framework as we move forward. During the last call, Jim sort of mentioned about 5 levels. I had talked about some parameters. And as you'll see in the attached framework, which is aligned with the governor, more restrictive to Martha's comment than the state in many areas. But it basically sort of takes us from level 5, where we were, quote unquote, weathering the storm, to use the governor's words, to level 4, where we are now, where we had essential workers and we identified worker activities, and then sort of looks at steps as we were to open and potential communication and opportunities to open with no dates. And this is really, really important. While I sort of laid out some maybe May, maybe June, July, whatever, I think as the governor is, and I think the council at large would say, like Chris just mentioned, if things go sideways, it's going to go back, our timeline will go backwards. If everybody complies and is cooperative and supportive, then we can slowly take small steps to move forward. So for example, I think everybody is aware that we allowed isolated workers to go to work, which is sort of the beginning of level 4. We identified a number of quote unquote businesses or types of work. I think there's potentially, and I'd like to discuss this coming up, a level where there's some other worker activities that we may want to include right now. So for example, on-island cleaners, can they go and clean a senior person's house? Is that the kind of activity that we didn't include in the ordinance, but we probably want to? So I'd like to come back to that later, or maybe on the next agenda item if you want. From there, we then go to, I believe, office workers. Right now, if you're in an office or in a business, you're not able to go to your office per the ordinance. And I think on May 4th, that may be a step we want to take. Again, up to the council. In that same level would be off-island service providers. So, if somebody is coming here to do a delivery or a radon test or, moving, cleaning out a house or moving a house in, if you were to come on island, you're providing a service, you go to that place and then you go back to the boat and leave in isolated leave, that may be something we want to consider as a step. The next step would be, as the governor is planning in mid-May or early May, do we go from 5 to 10, as she is proposing she is going to do? And that's sort of the 4 steps of level 4. And then we get to level 3, which is preparing the summer, both businesses, work crews. How do we start thinking about how the businesses are going to open? Obviously, it's up to them, but are there sort of guidelines or some expectations that we have? And then also, how do we think about seasonal employees arriving on island, with the quarantine, which would of course still be in effect? How do we make sure that all those guidelines are being held? To your comment, Ken, there are going to be a lot more people and our resources are going to be even more strained than they are as far as compliance. From there, the next level would be as businesses start opening. And again, no timing here. As we go from 5 to 10 and maybe 50, how do we start to integrate social distancing, masks, cleaning, testing, if there is testing, et cetera? And how do we think about minimum housing and when do we start minimum housing? And then finally, level 1 would be when we have the island, quote unquote, functioning at a new normal, whatever that may be. And how are we as the island thinking about all of these areas? Social distancing, wearing masks, cleaning. To be honest with you, I can't imagine house rentals and cleaning, but boy, that's going to be a task. Group sizes, handling of COVID positive testing, positive employees and testing. So I laid out a framework. The hope is that it helps our businesses and our community start to see these steps and stages, and then the ability to pull back. And I did that to help all of us have a framework towards it. Obviously, it is aligned with the governor, maybe more conservative, but aligned. And I am very open to totally ripping this apart, totally changing it, but at least coming out with some form of framework, some form of structure, so that people know from where we're coming and to where we're going. And so I sort of lay that out to everybody, and really open to anything. I just want to try and come out of this conversation with the beginning of a conversation about a framework.
And if I could put things in perspective a little bit from what you're saying, if anyone's not aware, the governor put out a document called the Reopening Rhode Island Charting the Course. He put it out April 27, 2020. For those of you watching, it looks like this. And it's a several page document basically talking about what you're talking about phasing the economy open, reopening Rhode Island, and how she envisions that will happen in a very preliminary form and a rudimentary form. That's available on, I think, on the website, on her website, on the state's website, and other places. So thank you, Sven, for that introduction to what you're talking about. Anyone have any comments initially? Chris Willie.
I think, Sven, you did a lot of work on this. Thank you. To Ken's point, the governor outlined a reopening plan that this is somewhat modeled after. I think that, the rules and regulations that are surrounding businesses in Rhode Island, especially the hospitality business, which is what most of our business community is made up with, are already terribly complicated and stringent, or they're going to be. I think if we want to focus on the things that we are in control of right now, which are the things that we're more stricter than the state on, the Block Island quarantine, the rooming house licenses, what else are we more strict on? There's 3 or 4 things, which I brought up at the last meeting.
Right.
Can we just focus on modifying those, because those are what drives anything that's on Sven's list here is discussing those specific things, because that's what's more restrictive than the state. Otherwise, a lot of these businesses would already be able to start opening. So our restrictions are keeping them from opening. So particularly when it comes to off-island, workforce. And, as far as other businesses that aren't in the hospitality business, I would defer to what the state does as essential activities. I don't want to make this any more complicated than it needs to be. People that can work from home should continue to work from home until they can't, until they need to go to work. That should be remembered. The driving force around a lot of this work that Sven did is what we're more restrictive on. And, let's focus the discussion on that. And one last point is, I don't really want to get into, from my perspective, parameters that these businesses have to work within that are more excessive than the state. I think all of these businesses know what they're going to have to do and are learning what they have to do as the season approaches. Let them do that. And I think our focus should actually be on pointing them in the right direction when they do have the questions, not telling them what they have to do. I think parameter is the wrong word. I think we need some indicators that we can measure before we go from level to level. I don't want to set any parameters. I'd like to see some indicators for lack of a better word, and follow to some degree, what the state, the state governor put out, and focus the discussion now on what we can change, which is, coming up on May 8th. Thank you.
Ken,
Martha,
it's Martha again. Well, yeah, that's all good and well, but again, I said this last time. We just skipped it. We allowed some local work, and now we're just skipping over to opening up everything for the season. And as far as essential workers go, I thought contractors or construction, I know construction is essential in Rhode Island. It's not out here yet. So I mean, I don't even know what the other list includes as far as essential workers from the state goes. But I mean, we saw something today. The hairdressing salon is making plans to open up, and I don't know if that's how that's even going to work upstate yet. There's been talk about it, but I don't think there's anything definitive come out. And I don't want to be. I feel like we're leapfrogging all the things, the little things that we sort of forget about, the repairs of houses and just general maintenance and that sort of thing, to go headlong into bringing all kinds of people in that I'm not sure we're even going to be able to bring in. I don't understand how the gathering of numbers of people works. Are restaurants even going to be able to be open? Do we know that? From the state perspective, I think they're still all talking takeout, aren't they? And how does that impact staffing? I mean, we need to get some. I don't want to get a survey of people saying, "I want to open May 8th." That's to me demonstrated. Think about it. Step back and think about it. And haven't you read anything that's been, like I said before? It's like everybody's acting like terms and conditions of iTunes. Everybody just says, "Yeah, I accept," and nobody's really reading it and knowing what's going on. And how can you live in this world today and not understand what's happening, which I think somebody alluded to earlier.
Ken?
Yeah, Jim Kern, go ahead.
I think germane to both of the counselors' comments, the second part of Ben's document that he circulated, and I contributed to it some, both the first page and the second page. The second page deals with suggesting that a number of representative groups from different industries contribute to maybe creating some, I'm going to use the word guidelines, as opposed to particular parameters that they have to be inside of. I said last week, I agree with Chris that all of the incentives associated with running a business, I think, work into doing it in a way where we can be as safe as we can, but operate to the reasonable level that this summer is going to be able to allow. I think people would benefit from working together to identify what those guidelines are. All of the governors are creating those kinds of commissions and panels. One of them has 3 medical people and 10 or 11 business people. I think that might be the Massachusetts one. And I also agree with Chris that just in terms of making it comprehensible and something that we can communicate, I do think it makes some sense to concentrate on the exceptions, concentrate in terms of trying to identify, but also try to communicate where are the exceptions of Block Island relative to the state of Rhode Island. And that speaks to Martha's point. Do people understand where we are? Do people understand what different things mean? Are they applying some understanding of somebody else's rules when they should be applying ours? So as we move from level, whatever it is, 4 to 3 or 5, 4 to 4.1 to 4.2 to 4.3, concentrating on the exceptions and and including those that operate these businesses in the creation of the guidelines, I think will help both sides of that, right? Because it'll help buy-in and understanding, and also hopefully create a better product, because some number of government officials trying to create those guidelines, I would submit would be less beneficial and less effective, and just not as good as those people that actually do it, as I think we all agree. Lastly, kind of a couple of technical inputs. We're creating a similar registration arrangement and we'll be ready to go for the minimum housing inspection. That isn't intended to indicate to anyone listening that that's relative to a timeline that town staff believes should be applied. It is just to communicate to the town council that we have prepared and we're ready to execute at the point where the town council decides it is appropriate. Because I think another part of this is we're trying to work with the businesses to set up such that if there's a 2 or 3 or 4 week lead time, we're not arriving at a particular date without having provided for that lead time. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Sven, do you have a hand?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts, and actually, I think we're modeling this in the right way. I agree with the exceptions. There's no question about that, and we do have a number. To Martha's comments, and I hope everybody can find this on ClerkBase if they need. But right now we, in my layout, we're at level 4. 4.1, Martha, would be adding some worker activities within that shelter in place, so nothing to do with the quarantine, but a small step. We also talked, and Chris had mentioned a number of times, taking some of those essential activities and flipping them to worker activities, so it's really clear what permissibilities they have. And then 4.2 is what I'd like to see, and we'll talk about in the next agenda item, is on May 4th, potentially adding 1 to 2 business or office workers into the definition of worker activities, as well as this, what I'll call isolated visit business. And so I think we are, or at least this plan tries to lay out the small steps, and definitely is not jumping to far away, or at least it's not intending to jump that way. Lastly, Ken, just as I was very encouraged when as Jim just laid out, I do talk about some consideration, which are social distancing, mask, cleaning, group size, handling of COVID positive employees, and testing. I think in many of those situations, we are going to be unique, potentially more conservative than the state. And I did reach out to the people on the list there. You'll see for hotels, Julie Fuller, bars, Kristen Kiley, retail, Cindy Lasser, marinas, real estate, Kate Butcher, etc. And everyone was hands down wanting to help. There's clearly a desire by, I think we've seen so many emails, Karina Cochran, many, saying that they want to participate. Actually, Jess wrote a really good one. So I think this is a way to get the community involved. And to Chris's comment, boy, nobody's dictating, nobody's building parameters. We're trying to tell people how to do it. It's rather letting them say, okay, how are we going to handle cleaning, and what are those protocols, so that at least there are some guidelines on Block Island. People can exceed them, and the free market will determine where people want to go. If they see a messy place that doesn't look like it's been cleaned, they probably won't want to go there. But it's guidelines to make sure that Block Island is as healthy and as safe as possible. So I happen to think that including businesses and feedback from the public is a really good thing. I don't think it's a waste of time. I think it's about inclusion. But again, that's my point of view.
Thank you, Sven. I think one thing that we've gotten from the emails we've gotten is several things actually. that the business community pretty much is looking for some sort of guideline, some sort of plan, as the governor has roughly outlined, maybe a little bit more specific if possible. The community has expressed concerns about what type of summer we're going to have. That is to say, when do we, at what point, and there's some people are suggesting sooner than later, do we indicate that it's not going to be a normal summer? We're not going to have certain events. There's also been an indication and a concern about how fast we open things up, and that we don't want to do it too fast. And addressing the comments about the minimum housing inspections and bringing employees in to start opening businesses up, the concerns are also several in that who's going to monitor the health of these employees who are going to be showing up, and who's going to, if they do get sick, where are they going to quarantine? And if they do get sick, who's going to pay for their health care, and who's going to provide them the food they need? I know there's been some indications that there are people here now who've recently arrived who are not being provided for in those ways. I guess I'm told that the food pantry was overwhelmed today by some unfamiliar faces. So we can plan as much as we want and set guidelines and whatnot, but there needs to be also be a willingness on the other side to abide by them and to do as much as possible to ameliorate any shortcomings of the whole plan. So I think those are concerns that we need to take into account going forward. Any comments? Crickets.
Why aren't we waiting until May 9th? I know nobody wants to hear that, but I think it's a question.
Can I answer that?
Go ahead, Jim.
Please.
And I'm really jumping in with another suggestion. Martha, I really think even if you don't, like we're standing still, both of your feet are together. If you don't want to take a step until May, whatever it is, 8th, I think there's a good amount of work we want to do before you take that step. I don't think you want to wait and then start to do the work. And one of my ideas, sitting here reading Sven's list, is to voluntarily assign or to distribute. There's 5 town councilors. There's me. There may be other people we want to involve in this. One to each of these groups. Try to have some kind of gathering, which almost surely isn't going to be physical, but I'm not sure it's completely out of the question in some cases. Some kind of meeting, whether it be virtual or otherwise, and allow people, meaning the people that operate these businesses, some time to prepare for that, sit with them, and then bring that information back to inform a future discussion and really not just discussion, but actually try to put some things down. As Sven said, there were some things that Jessica Willey put down in a list that kind of designed in rather general terms, but we have to eventually start to try to design and actually identify. And I think one of the ways you could do that is to spread out. We don't really have that much time. It may feel like a lot of time till the end of May, but in some ways these months go by. It seems like 6 months, but it'll be here soon enough. And we want some time to think about it and work on it. So I don't think there's you all may disagree, but I don't think this is a case where an individual counselor's association with one of these businesses would create a conflict, because I think we're partly looking for expertise, but you can differ with that and go a different way and cross assign or cross volunteer or whatever, if you think this is a reasonable idea anyway. And then try to use their expertise to come back and not make it an endless process. But I do think, Martha, we want to, as policymakers yourselves, need to start to work it out. And then you need to give people some time to prepare, and that's both whatever involvement we have, an example being the minimum housing inspections, but I've had conversations with Highway and Dave Sniffen with the beach. We need to kind of anticipate where we're going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks from now. Thanks.
No, I understand that. I understand that completely. I'm not objecting to having a roadmap. We need a roadmap and we need some plans. I'm just looking at May 4th on this and looking at immediate and May 4th. And I'm very, very concerned that we're sending out the wrong message, that we're trying to get everything in place if we can, not when we can, but if we can. So everybody wants to get everything open as soon as we possibly can, but as soon as we can, not as soon as we want to. They're two different things.
Thank you, Martha. Chris Willie. Chris, you're muted.
I have a quick question for Jim, because I didn't get the, regarding the rooming licenses. All right. So as far as process, as I understand it, the rooming licenses affect the boarding houses and hotels, and not B&Bs. In order to get a rooming license, you need to have an inspection by the minimum housing inspector. And in order to have a minimum housing inspector come and inspect, some of these businesses need certain things done and certain work done by maybe off-island contractors. So my question for Jim, as far as timeline and working with these establishments and trying to get them inspected so the rooming license can actually be issued, which isn't opening for business. It's just meaning getting the process of the inspection done. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Because that's important to know while we're moving forward. And to Martha's point, I don't want to send the wrong message or a message that, yes, this is what we're opening up the island right now. These are all steps we need to take. But what's the timeline, Jim, for the minimum housing inspector to inspect these establishments? And the second part to that question is, how are you going to prioritize who gets inspected first?
Okay. So part of what makes this question interesting, but it's also representative of a number of other issues we're going to deal with. And I think it can cause some consternation for people. I'm not going to try to make this needlessly complicated, but as Chris described it, I'm not an expert on the boarding house, on these facilities out here, as you know, or the requirements of minimum housing. But I think his description was accurate, and I will identify any ways that it wasn't. And so, in terms of Chris's description that there would be places that need off-island workers, that's clearly true in my understanding. So that's one group. There may be another group, however, where that's not true. So that's one distinction, and that would be one input into, as anyone can, as you would figure, one of the inputs into just availability to be ready to inspect it. So in simpler terms, if I'm pretty much ready, or I can get ready with the workers, with tradespeople that are already out here, and I can get in the queue with our staff people and set up, I think that is going to be a major part, to answer his last part, of how the sequence lines up. But if I'm in another group where, and this is for the policymakers, which I think is a big part of Chris's question, if I am somebody who needs off-island people, that needs to be sequenced. That needs to be allowed to be sequenced and then set up to do that inspection. My message to all of you is that we're ready to accommodate both of those approaches. And so you have kind of two. I would make one other distinction. One is about boarding houses, where people are going to stay in preparation of participating in businesses, and another is a business that involves people staying in it. So I see A coming before B, and I think that also feeds into the priority. But I also I think so. The answer would be those would be determinants into the sequencing of how it would be inspected, but also just availability. In other words, if you're ready and somebody else is ready, we're going to inspect them within the kind of pattern that I described with respect to the other distinctions.
Ben Rissam?
A couple of things, Jim, just to go back, one of Chris' questions was roughly on timing, and I've heard everything from 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. You have an idea of sort of that span of time from when we start the inspections to when theoretically they could be done, roughly?
Again, I think we have to put the big caveat of what I would call the sequencing of off-island tradespeople to prepare.
Sure.
But if somehow you could wave a magic wand and all of that was done, based on the conversations I've had with our staff people, we're looking at 2 to 3 weeks completing. So our part of this is 2 to 3 weeks, maybe on the shorter side, but I'll go on the longer side to be safe. From when we start.
Following, no.
Ben Rissam?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Oh, so to Chris's point, on 4.3, which is that level, that same level says allow trades onto the island so they can prep the businesses and start that minimum housing inspection being performed, thinking that there's a 3-4 week window, and maybe we need to move pieces around in there so that sequencing can be done. But Chris, I think that's you hit on the good sequencing point. A little bit back to Martha, and trust me, I am trying to be as focused on health and safety and the island as possible. All of the activities that at least I'm personally proposing, that would start on May 4th are things that have been, actually were never stopped by the governor. So as far as getting to Rhode Island, a small manufacturing business has been able to run. A real estate offices were able to do different things or inspections and stuff like that in many cases. So I guess the intent was not trying to further open or do anything aggressive. It was just sort of following in 2 weeks from when we allowed isolated contractors. And I'm fine to move it to May 8th or 9th or whatever the group wants to do. I just think from a sequencing point of view, that probably the next level, which is like we did isolated workers. Here, let's do businesses, offices, bookkeepers, lawyers, whatever it may be. Right now, they can't go to work. So just explaining
I understand that part. You're still missing. I can't seem to make this clear. You're talking about bringing in mainland crews to help open hotels, but you're not talking about expanding the local workforce beyond 2 people. And to me, there's something really wrong in that equation.
Okay, I think that's in 4.3, but maybe it's in the wrong spot, which is expand to 3 to 4 employees per site.
But that's only when bringing tradespeople in.
No, that worker activity are people that are sheltered in place, and right now it's 1 to 2, and it would be expanding 3 to 4. So worker activity is a shelter in place.
Okay. As long as we're not, I just feel like the whole emphasis here is, I just feel like we're skipping things. Thank you.
Ken, can I?
Yeah, Jim Kern, go ahead.
Quickly, it may be that the one of the things that those of us that have been answering questions about what's allowed, we kind of collect kind of the list of what we have called off-island service providers for consideration by the council for inclusion. So yes, that is off-island, but it's kind of specific things, and you may not have been completely referring to this, but that's also a category that that does require off-island expertise, so to speak. But I think Sven and others of us that have been involved see it as a very isolated visit. It's something that we talked about in previous conversations, an isolated visit come on and off. And then there's the next thing, which is when do we allow small groups to come on and work? We have a number of projects associated with the town that would fall into that category, and there's certainly others that we've been made aware of by other people. And I've spoken with companies that are perfectly willing to operate within whatever parameters the council we create, but I think there is some demand for and some understanding about being able to come out and do that with a crew of 4 or under 5, which is what has been going on in other parts of the state. Thank you.
The agenda item just says discuss and act on the next steps of COVID-19 health, safety, and welfare management by the town. At this point, I'd like to invite either Mark Clark to if he has any comments or input, maybe have a brief input on this point. Mark, do you have anything you'd like to add in terms of this?
I'm actually going to defer right now to Dr. Workup. Can you hear me, Ken?
Yeah, I can, Mark. Go ahead.
Tom, did you want to chime in here or jump in?
Sure, thank you. We've been coordinating the last week or so with coming up with phased approaches so we have proper testing to both keep the health center continuity patients safe, but also have mechanisms that we can do testing for a variety of situations, whether or not there's somewhat of a community outbreak or there's pockets, say, within a business establishment, as well as communicating with Mr. McComb regarding a more accelerated testing schedule if we had to, based on what happens with opening up the island. But otherwise, I think a lot of the conversation with Councilman Ryson put up, which is businesses are going to have to be good partners here, and with distancing, cleaning, surveillance, and then ultimately deciding on how they're going to isolate their workers if there's issues with their testing or while they're on their investigation.
Thank you, Tom. Any questions? Other comments?
And Ken, I just wanted to let you all know that Lori Anderson, as part of our new team, is also on this call with me. She's here with me, taking part in the call as well. So the whole new medical center team is present on the call, as well as myself, if anyone has any questions for any of us.
Great, thank you, Mark. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you very much and welcome. Welcome one and all. I guess the question, is what we've been talking about here, whether or not there are any concerns of what we've been discussing, whether that raises any concerns in terms of the medical center, in terms of of an influx of folks from off island coming here with the understanding that they're there to quarantine, but also with the understanding that they may be bringing, unbeknownst to them, some things with them. Do you have any concerns along those lines that we should be aware of? Yeah, Tom?
I would say that we're preparing for various options. I think it's whatever the town council decides, whether or not it's a slow uptick of business, then we will be prepared for that. And if there's a greater influx, then we have options and prepared for that presentation to the island as well.
And then just to piggyback, this is Mark Clark, on what Dr. Workup is saying. I mean, look, what we've been saying all along as sort of providing counsel, providing advice or the medical perspective to the town council, everyone already knows this. We know that with each step we take toward reopening, there is going to be increased risk to the island. I mean, that's just a fact. but we also know we can't keep the island closed forever. So the policy decisions, of course, are in your hands. Tom and Lori and I and the whole team here, we are really trying to anticipate all of the possible scenarios and what it might look like depending on the speed with which you all choose to act. The information that you need to know is that there is no perfect way for us to determine. We've already talked at previous meetings here about testing. We know that's not going to be the perfect solution, even if we are able, and we should do broad testing on island, but that's not going to allow us to let down our guard. So on our call today with our team, with Dr. Workup and Lori and all of us here, one of the things we were discussing was the importance of keeping the message strong that vigilance needs to be high as you move forward with these steps, so that all of the practices that we've learned over the last month, that we continue to carry those out as you guys move forward with opening things up. So the risk will be here, and there's no perfect answer. The risk will increase with each step you take, and we are going to do our best to be poised to prepare for that. Yes, we know we have an elderly population. Yes, we know we have a very limited capacity at the medical center, and we want to keep patients in the community and the staff here safe. So we have protocols in place, and Dr. Workup and Lori are working on protocols moving forward to deal with a surge. So we think that we will have capacity to do that. We've got plenty of PPE here. We are stockpiling that for what we see as sort of more activity as the summer moves on. And the other piece of this is that, the role of the medical center in terms of acutely ill patients will be what it's always been, which is to stabilize, treat where we can, and then really send off patients who are acutely severely ill. And that's what we've always done. We've got plans in place to do that in a safe way so that we're not contaminating other folks.
Doctors, do you foresee any difficulty or any dangers in proceeding at some point? I'm not saying right away, but in proceeding with a gradual reopening in terms of bringing in the island workers, many of whom live in relatively close confines. Aside from the obvious things, would you be overly concerned about that, or is that something that's going to dissipate as we get farther into the summer?
My concern would be that, as we mentioned earlier, is that every time we open that process up, that definitely increases the risk. What I would say is the reality that we have to deal with often on the ground is that individual that has asymptomatic COVID or is now COVID positive, they go home and they have a 5-year-old at home, as well as maybe an elderly mother that lives in the house, and they can't isolate. And whether or not that just spreads through the entire house like a cold, that if you have a child, it just kind of runs through the house. And then how do we mitigate that process? And I think it's also a system that Councilman Woolley's brought up before, which is that if the businesses have a plan and it's their plan to have, whether or not we somehow can give them a confidence that that plan is acceptable. But I'm more concerned about the what if that person has a COVID positive worker and that worker has to be isolated or has to be segregated. What are their plans for getting them off island? What are they planning on doing the segregation? Because the ramifications of those plans, whether they're good or bad, affect all of us on this call because it'll just come through the community. So I think it is their plan to have, but there should be some guidance on whether or not it's an acceptable plan that is going to protect the island.
Are there situations in place where if, let's say, a worker let's say they show up on the island yesterday and they're not yet at work and all of a sudden they test positive, are there any, and they become seriously, I mean, it's a situation where they're positive enough to have to go off island. Are there any roadblocks to keeping them from being transported and or taken in somewhere on the mainland? Are there any roadblocks in the sense of because they are a transient worker, if you will, or seasonal worker, that would create problems for them getting proper treatment?
So
Not that I would anticipate.
Yeah. So no, Ken, there would not be any barrier. We've been worried about the surge being so great on the mainland that they just didn't have capacity to receive patients and they go on diversion. That has not happened to date. We don't think that's going to happen. We have a means to transport very ill patients. The only time that we would keep somebody here is really for the same reason that we've done so all along in the past, which would be inclement weather and we just can't get somebody out. And so, we're preparing to have to keep ill patients here for, up to 48 hours if weather didn't let us get somebody off. But
Yeah.
we don't anticipate barriers from the other side in terms of getting folks, whatever their documented or undocumented status is. That's not really a part of the equation.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Sven Rissom?
Yeah, just building on that, and I think Tom really hit it on the nail. My hope would be, let's just say with hotels, 'cause that's really what we're talking about right now, that part of these, I call them considerations, that is, one of them is handling of COVID positive employees. What is their plan? And each hotel could have a different plan, but one, I think it's very helpful for Tom and the medical center to know that plan, so that if suddenly, X hotel has a positive, then, okay, pull that page out, you know what the plan is. And then two, to make sure that everybody's got a place for isolation of an employee, for if that's something that is warranted. So that's where I think really the blending, and Chris brought it up, we don't want to tell the business what to do at all. We would like to hear from them. It's like, look, how do we all work together, and what is your plan? Hotel A, Hotel B, Hotel C, restaurants. What happens if you had an employee that was serving dinners that, suddenly now is positive? How do we deal with that? So that's one of the real reasons I like this idea of having these business groups come together, let them lay out their plans. It's not about parameters, like Chris mentioned. It's really around some guidelines. It's just what are they going to do, and hear it. And in certain cases, the medical center may have to step in and say, that guideline may not be good enough. Let's sharpen it a little bit, but let the business drive that one. So
Ken, if I might comment on Sven's point. So Sven, you nailed it.
Go ahead.
It's Mark Clark. You nailed it. And really, what's going to be the more likely scenario is what you just sort of began talking about. So you have a situation where you have multiple business owners. They have group employee housing where people are all together. If what is going to be the likely scenario is you'll have some positives who are not sick enough to be in the hospital. And as you all know, most folks, the hospitals are not admitting anybody unless they're really, really, really sick because they don't have the beds. So if you're able to be cared for at home, that's the general plan all across the board in multiple states. And so this idea that if we have a COVID positive patient out here, whether they're a worker or an islander, that we can somehow kind of have them leave the island, that's not realistic. And so in particular with group employee housing, and this is where I don't know what your policy will be, but the guidance that I think the businesses will need is finding a solution so that there's a place to put those folks. They can't obviously go back to, if they're well enough to be out of the hospital, there needs to be a place for them to be cared for at home. And Dr. Workup has a plan to have communication with any positive patient, on a daily basis from the medical center to take care of those folks. And I'll let him speak to that. But the idea here is that those folks would still remain on island for all intents and purposes, and they need to be isolated from other workers and isolated from the community so that we're not having a huge wildfire of COVID on the island.
Yeah, well, that becomes the elephant in the room, I think, in all these discussions is the elephant in the room is the word quarantine and what that entails. I mean, unless you've been quarantined out here, being quarantined in your house out here is totally different from being quarantined in a 12 by 12 foot room for 2 weeks, and having your meals brought to you and being isolated as much as possible. And what is a realistic expectancy of being able to do that efficiently and properly under the circumstances out here? And it's the same thing with when we expect folks to come to the island and quarantine for 2 weeks, realistically, to stay in their house and not go out to the post office and not go out for food and not go out for, to the beach or anything like that, but to quarantine, that's the elephant in the room. That's what's the realistic expectation of that actually happening in the appropriate manner, isn't it? Sven Rissom?
You're right, Ken. It is the elephant in the room. And that's where I think if we get the businesses to at least be part of that solving the elephant, at least it has everybody putting skin in the game. And as your son knows, in New York, it's hard to be in a small apartment in quarantine and locked up. So I think what I would love to have the council do is, because I don't know that we're going to go through this whole phased approach. I think there's going to be many meetings worth and sort of, detail it out. I would love to get the council's read on whether they're okay in letting these business clusters, and if they have any changes or ideas, and letting these business clusters meet, give feedback on the considerations that I mentioned, or should we not do that? I think you heard Dr. Clark and Tom say that probably it's a good idea, but it's really a council decision. But I'd love to see some action come of this, or let you lead.
Chris Willie?
I think the business community, we could formulate or put together whatever meetings we want with different segments of the business community. There's plenty of people that would want to participate. But I think that's a little closer to and more in line to when they're ready to actually open and do business. I think the immediate concern with all these businesses is when they can open, if they can open, and how they can open. And as I said before, there's 3 or 4 things that we are more strict on that is preventing them from moving forward. So if you want to have meetings with these people to talk about those things, that's fine. We're gonna, the majority of the questionnaires that we sent out, they gave us, I'm perfectly comfortable knowing what they all need to open up. They need tradesmen to come out. If that's what the council wants to entertain, that's what should be discussed. Rooming licenses need to be issued so employees can be moved in, and those type of parameters or indicators, whatever you want to call it, for all the other businesses can be, discussed. But I think right now we need to talk about what we're in control of, and the state's going to do what the state's going to do. We need to talk about as we move forward what needs to be relaxed or can be relaxed, or if we want to relax it, so these places can start planning for what basically right now to me looks like something opening, being mid-June maybe. I don't know. Rooming licenses are going to take a month to issue. I don't know how that falls in everybody's plans. So those are the discussions that I think we need to focus on. And Sven, with getting together with all the other businesses, I think that's a great idea. It was proposed a couple weeks ago, but I think it was too early to do that. I know there's plenty of volunteers that would take the lead with different segments of the economy or with our businesses. So, I'd go ahead and pursue that for sure. But I think we need to figure out how to get the ball rolling, if we want to get the ball rolling for some of these entities now. So we know what to do come May 8th instead of rehashing all this on May 8th. And May 8th is only the date that's being used because that's when our order ends. And I know the governor extended some parts of her order, which also ended on May 8th. So I just want to be clear on that. That's not an opening day. That's just when our orders are ending. So thank you.
Right. Martha, do you have anything?
Nothing in addition, nothing more than what I already said. I don't see it. There's no reason why businesses have to have us tell them to get together. I mean, they can meet under whatever rules there are and come up with any proposal. I don't think, I'm a little disappointed that people aren't, it doesn't seem like people are doing it. Everybody's just saying, well, I'm going to open May 8th or whatever it is they're saying or thinking, or June 1st. And I want to go back to this gathering of 50 people. How does a gathering of 50, we have any idea how the gathering of 50 people impacts the beach? any beach.
Chris, Willie?
I forgot to mention one thing to specifically with the rooming licenses. I talked to a business owner because I had questions about H2B, J1s, things like that. And J1s for the most part are on hold. H2Bs are contractual, and all those contracts are anywhere from mid-May to mid-June. And the housing, this particular business had housing that ended for the existing H2Bs that they have contracts for. That housing closes on May 15th, which means that they would need to, if they were to retain these employees, which are essential for the business, they would need to retain those people on or after May 15th. So that's, I think Ken said, or Jim said earlier, like the month of May is here. It's going to go by quick. May 15th, if that business doesn't have a rooming license by May 15th, what happens? And, that's why I think these are the nitty gritty conversations that have to happen instead of these generalities of unspecific timelines and stages. No, it's time to actually talk dates and things that specifically we can control and get those hashed out. So we're not doing this again next week or on May 8th or whenever the next time is that we're meeting.
Ben?
I think to Chris's point, that's item 4.3, minimum housing inspections being performed. I know Jen Brady and Jim have talked about a registration process, and there's a good plan. To Chris's point, May 15th is less than 4 weeks. It's about 3 weeks, and I think that's why I wanted to lay out this phased approach, because there are critical things on here, and there are some nice to haves. And I'm right with you. I want to start making some decisions that don't necessarily open up the housing, but at least get the minimum housing done, or the minimum housing inspections done and the process done, so that we can get things inspected, as an example. And that doesn't mean we're opening anything. We're just at the gate to be able to open. And then we can see where the governor is.
Andre, do you have anything?
Nope.
Okay.
Ken?
Mark Tilson?
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, just on the minimum housing situation. Some of those buildings do need personnel from the mainland to come out to get them open. The priority as far as a minimum housing inspection is obviously the health, safety, and welfare of the people that are going to be staying there. So the first thing we look for are the fire alarm systems tested and ready to go. Is the sprinkler system certified to go? Is it tagged and ready to go? Without those people coming out as inspectors, we'll go out to the building, no fire alarm tag, no sprinkler tag, we turn around and we leave. So you have to keep that in the whole scope of what you're discussing as far as getting the inspections done. We could do everything else, but we're obviously not going to process any license without a business or establishment having their fire alarm system and their sprinkler system tested and certified for use. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Jim Kern?
So the sequence, as I am hearing it and kind of formulating it is allowing this is a difference from my previous answer, or part of my previous answer to Martha, so I should identify that. I am now not just talking about off-island service providers, radon, movers, delivery. That's something that I would represent has already developed a demand that I think the council could make a decision to allow people to make a very isolated visit and come out. I'm actually going to another level, which is to allow off-island tradespeople that have the kind of capabilities that Mark is talking about, and I think everybody's talked about, and Chris has talked to people who need it, and I have, and the rest of us have. Allowing that in the first step, and that is likely as early as the ordinance can be revised and the council can vote it, which, as we know, is on the order of 5 or 6 or 7 working days, or 5 or 6 anyway. So we could put that in the process for Kathy and the rest of us to work on formulating it and set up to be voting it middle of next week. That sets up so that as Mark says, the heavy lifting part of a minimum housing inspection can be provided, so that the timeline that I gave out, which isn't going to be anything like that if that stuff's not done, can run its course over 2 or 3 weeks. And May 15th is actually 2 weeks and 2 days by my count. And, you're into mid to late May under those circumstances, so that then your boarding process can begin. That's scary, I know, but if we're really talking about the rest of this, and I think most of us believe that this is best approached in a stair step and not roll to June 15th and then try to jump 6 steps at once. I think the boarding is the first step, and then follow from that. And in the meantime, we can engage the expertise and try to be of help, both in terms of communicating, allowing the owners to communicate with us, because even simple communications are going to make us better at being able to administer this and create policy relative to it. And that can be going on concurrently. So you're moving to the end of May. In my discussions with different people, the end of May stays pretty use the word closed down and more preparatory and not actually active. And you're not looking at being active until probably at least mid-June, 3rd week of June, something like that. And that's assuming things are going well in terms of indicators, both at the regional level, state level, and out here. But that's 2 weeks plus a couple days to hit a calendar that's not particularly ambitious. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Jim. Sven?
Just to be clear, what I heard the last few folks say is the first bullet of 4.3, allow trays on islands so they can prep the businesses. That would drop to 4.2. I had mentioned that would be a May 4th or, maybe May 8th, whenever we can do it. So basically, what I'm hearing is moving some bullets around here, but keeping the phases. And I'm just trying to set up that structure, Ken, because I think it'll help everybody versus free-form dialogue.
Right, okay. Any other comments?
Let me comment on, Ken, may I?
Andre, please, thank you.
So, Jim, you're talking about, getting the trays out here to open. I mean, are we keeping in mind that the state's still closed off to other states? So I think what should we, are you talking about tradesmen from Connecticut? Are you talking about tradesmen from Rhode Island? What are you talking about in that? Because as far as I know, up until May 8th right now, tradesmen from Connecticut or Massachusetts are supposed to quarantine when they enter the state.
Jim?
Technically, well, first of all, I'm not an expert on the kind of the roster of who might be prospective tradespeople to come out here, and what percentage of them are allowed, would naturally come from Rhode Island. But the quarantine orders from all 3 of the governors, as I understand them, not only for tradespeople, but for people who work, they're allowed to cross borders to work. I've listened to a number of conversations between town managers and mayors in the communities that border other states. And it was something that was hammered out over some number of weeks. At first, Governor Raimondo said didn't want people to come back and forth, and she adjusted it to work. And so the basic, and then didn't want people to stop at supermarkets on the way back. But in order to travel between the two states for work, that's allowed, and it's been allowed. Again, I don't know how many people would be coming from Connecticut or Massachusetts to work here, but I don't see the governors, the respective governors' orders relative to a 14-day quarantine. I think, as most of us know, the quarantine does apply to people who are looking to relocate up here for the summer or whatever because they own property. But there's been an exception for work. I think, furthermore, I think this would, in a lot of cases, fall into essential work. But the answer really is people have been allowed to move between at least those three states I'm aware of, to work. Real quickly, if I could add in, to the extent that we're trying to get Sven's framework sequenced, I would move allowed trades on the island so they can prep for businesses from 4.3 to 4.2. I feel less compelled about working activities for office 1 to 2 people. Leave it or move it down either way. The isolated visit business I would leave in 4.2, and that's, as I said, just those services. I think there's already kind of a demand for that, and I think it can be executed without running into a lot of other things.
Right. I think, Sven had mentioned that, you had actually worked with him on this plan. So, I got that earlier. Thank you. Is Vin Carlone online here?
Yes, I am.
Vin, Andre, you've been in, I think you've been in the room since we started our meeting, and you've heard about this plan of Sven's to open and different times and whatnot. Can you comment on that? Like, what do you see your role in that as?
Well, we are going to have to discuss this, the manager and I, about all the different aspects of enforcing the different procedures with respect to the state government and the town. And I had actually sent him some documents on that today. So we're going to have to come up with a plan and we should review that plan every week as the town changes courses.
Okay, because that's, as I'm listening to this, like, Ken and Sven are talking about, the elephant in the room, and I really think the enforcement aspect of this is the actual elephant in the room, because nobody has really talked to you about this. We haven't had any feedback from you about this, and like I'm of the opinion right now that I don't know how you would enforce it all, and people have been approaching me about businesses opening and whatnot, and I've kind of just been telling them that I think they should come up with a plan that they feel will keep them, their employees, and their families most comfortable. So I don't think these plans in these things are a boilerplate type thing. I think they're going to be up to the individual business owners to decide what they want going on in their businesses. However, with the restaurants, the big inns and whatnot, and the little inns, they're going to have to go, obviously judged by the, going to have to use the guidelines set forth by the state. And like I said, and another question I do have is, and if Bill McComb's online here is.
Could I just say one thing to you about that before we move on?
Yeah.
Andre, the businesses, I talked to a lot of the business people. The last thing, obviously, they want is to have a problem out here with this disease. So when we bring them into this conversation or have a conversation with them, first of all, we've gotten nothing but cooperation from the businesses on Block Island for years and years. We have a very good relationship with them. And they often come up with we have some very smart business people out here, and that's why they're successful. So they often come up with solutions. So there's probably a piece of this that we're missing, and we need to, get them involved in this conversation. And they probably have some solutions that we're not even aware of.
Right. That's why, I'm sitting here listening to all of this, and we are asked to decide something without the input from you and how that will all be handled. So I would personally like to see on paper, on these plans, what will be the enforcement aspect of all of this, and moving forward, because I think that's an important part of the whole concept of getting businesses up and running. And I mean, are you going to be able to? Are you going to do it? Are you going to be able to do it all? Do you need to farm it out somewhere? And to other organizations, like Kate said, Kate mentioned today, she had an issue in the harbor. Is that something you don't want to deal with or can't deal with? Or is that DEM? Like, I think we need to get what you're capable of, what you're willing to do, and try to fill in the blanks in that. So I'm kind of agreeing with Martha at this point, that it's good to talk about all this right now. We do need to have the conversation, but I want it to be a well-rounded conversation that encompasses everything and nothing's left out. Would you agree with that?
Well, I agree. I had actually reached out to the manager today to sit down and, when you create a law or a policy, you have to have a plan that follows up with enforcement. So my suggestion was to meet with maybe a couple of council people and the manager and talk about these things and see what makes sense and what's the best way to go about this. Because, this is talking about arresting people and charging people for things like this is all new. This isn't like somebody assaulting somebody, for instance. So we have to talk about how we do things like this and do them properly. It's a great concern to my staff. For instance, just on the call with the gentleman last night, who was a doctor apparently, and he said, "I'm just going for a walk." So he was rather agitated with the officer, and he didn't understand any of it, and so these are the types of encounters that can go terribly wrong all of a sudden. You understand?
I certainly understand. I certainly understand.
We have to have a way to, especially as we get more and more people, we have to have a way to do this sensibly, calmly, and professionally. And the last thing you want to do is charge people in a criminal court with things like this. That's a last resort.
I understand that. And I don't think any of us are asking for that. I think what I'm actually asking now, after living with our ordinance for the past month and a half and seeing where it has its strengths and where it has its obvious weaknesses, is that, and I had asked the town manager for this in an email 3-4 maybe a month ago before a meeting, and I basically said, please assemble the team, which was Macomb, yourself, Pete Gimp, and come up with options for the town council to consider, from maybe the most liberal to the most conservative, on how to deal with this. And otherwise, in my thinking, without that input from our, I'm going to say, team, because we do set the policy, we do make the ordinances, and we do expect the people under us, like yourself and the town manager, to enforce that. So we didn't really have any feedback about what couldn't be done and what could be done, what couldn't be done, what was unreasonable, what was completely ridiculous. And I'm sure some parts of it are seen by our management team as all the above. So
there's some things that, for instance, if you take a look at one of the laws created for a 14-day quarantine. So if the boat schedule opens up a bit, and that is still there, and even now, anybody walking off that boat that just intended to come here for a walk is actually violating a criminal law. You understand that? So if you had 3 boats and they took over 100 people each, and that was in place, it would be 300 people walking around in violation of that criminal law. Because they have no way
Is
to
it-
form.
This is
Mark?
Martha. Can I ask a question? Is this the same issue we came up against with the dune ordinance and the balloon ordinance of putting the penalties in the wrong place?
No, it's just a matter of, the unintended potential consequences or the fallout for the person trying to enforce this. What do you do with somebody that came here and now the next boat is in a couple hours later and they came here to walk around? They're technically in violation of this ordinance, are they not?
Stan Reeson?
Well, they
Can you-
shouldn't
well,
get on the boat in the first place.
Hold on, may I? Because I
All
was
right.
I was under
Andre?
the impression that, and Kathy can speak to this because it's good we have this because a lot of people are asking these questions, and we're going to obviously go off on a tangent here that people, we're going to get unfocused here, but I think these are important questions to ask, and it's an important discussion. That I was under the impression that if you came here longer than 2 weeks, you had to quarantine for 2 weeks. If you were moving out to your home, and if you wanted to, and this was the whole thing with the moving van, if you were going to come on a round trip, come the day, and you weren't going to be here 2 weeks, you were to go conduct your business, even though that we discouraged it. People, I was under the impression that this could be done, but then we have a shelter in place. So that's the confusing part. And this,
Well, you actually have a quarantine for anyone arriving on the island, okay? So, it's all right, because here's the part of it that I haven't told you. When we look at this, we have to take a look at the law and see. We don't necessarily have to enforce this to 100% of the way it's written. The intent of the law is what is important. So those are the things that we have to talk about. The intent of the law and getting it accomplished in that manner. Some things are going to fall by the wayside, obviously, like the point I just mentioned.
right. And like I said, I don't think anybody is looking to hand out summonses finding once in a while from gross, people that aren't, yeah, that's fine. However, sometimes just a cop showing up and saying, hey, this is the ordinance, knock it off, we got a call.
Well, that makes sense. That is what we intend to do with this. Obviously, this could escalate into something that we don't want it to have happen. And that's really the crux of our thought process with this. Most people will pay attention and most people listen. We've had very good success with this.
Okay, well, so back to my original question. So before we come up with all of this stuff, can the town manager put this proposal to the staff, and which would be yourself, which I think would be Bill McComb and Mark Tilson, Peter Gimp, and review all of this and just come back to us with feedback and about the different aspects of it that will make it more easy for you, easy for us, because personally, I feel as though we put something out there that didn't get vetted by staff. It's getting confusing to people. We're getting calls about it. Town manager's getting calls about it. And I think some of our intent on this thing, like you said, to speak to the intent, I think a lot of the intent is getting lost on people focusing on details, whether they are general details or they have questions about how a detail applies to how they can get around it. And that's human nature, and that's...
Here's the thing. If we were to enforce these laws exactly as written, all of those people sitting down at the boat in the 30-minute portion every day would be given summonses to go to court for failing to shelter in place.
And I understand that.
Oh, what I'm trying to say? So you have to use a little common sense with these things.
Well,
And you have to,
Okay.
you know,
Can I jump in, Ken?
No, hold on. Well, let me just let me just stop with it. Let me just say to Vin about that. I'm like, this is what I'm asking, because you say that and I get it, but this is the feedback that we did not get while we were making this, or while we put this ordinance together. So Jim,
I think I gave you a lot of feedback about this ordinance, as I recall.
at a
You know,
meeting,
yeah.
At a meeting?
At the first meeting. I think a lot of this, to begin with, I would have liked to just see, I think we could have done this with the cooperation of the people on this island. I think they would mostly cooperate with anything without an actual law being in place, and I stand by that. You know, I get it, as it gets to people coming here from afar, we have to have things in place, but everybody here has been very, very cooperative with this.
well, I agree with that 100%. And I just had that conversation with the contractor today, that they have been cooperating, I think, and I spoke to Tilson about it, 98, 95%. They want to do the right thing, but a lot of them are being punished by not being able to have their subs come out, and this, that, and the other thing. And I think, before we get into this whole thing of, and it goes to what Martha said of this Sven's plan here. I think we need to address that. The contractors from the state the subcontractors from the state, that, like some of them have gotten permits already to come out for emergency purposes, essential and whatnot. That's what I think we should be talking about before we should get that off our docket before this. But just to get back to what I said, the original intent, I just would like our ideas to be taken, to be discussed with the staff, and then brought back to us with potential problems that may be seen. So your concerns are addressed by the town council before we do these kind of things. And we may go with what we got, but at least the input, like I don't remember much input, and I could be wrong. I mean, things have been coming at us
Remember
fast
none.
for the past, month and a half. So moving forward, I just want everybody on this team involved in the decision-making process before we throw something out there that may not be workable and frustrates every single person that it affects. So with that, I do think that Jim Kern had a comment. Unless, Vin, you want to comment on that.
No, I think it's a wise move to involve the enforcement authority in the writing of an ordinance in a controlled environment, not in a telephonic meeting. I think I suggested that from the start, that we should sit down and construct this thing in a proper way.
And I'm ready, and that was a big part of my comment too, Andre. I'm looking back through my emails. Well, let me first say that I think the staff has been ready to make input to this decision-making process from the beginning. I think in everybody's defense, there has been, the reality of the schedule today. I shared this framework with the chief, but I'm not sure we've done that as well as we should have in the past, and that doesn't give him an opportunity to, as you say, put some detailed response together. So I think we need to do better all through that. I have one email, it's addressed to Ken from you, saying I'm looking for options for discussion, and you and I can discuss this later. But I think the chief, particularly, and I did in some of those early, really long meetings, tried to make some input relative to enforcement, and we're all in a new place, and the last thing I would say about that is our format, and we're not trying to keep secrets from anybody, but our format is such that that we do have to have conversations about actual enforcement practice that isn't necessarily, if this happens, what are you going to do, Chief? That we need to obviously allow our police officers discretion, judgment, and law enforcement is something that's done in a way, if I can say it this way, where we're not going to necessarily describe for everybody what the reaction is going to be. simple analogy. We don't let people know where we're gonna put a sensor for speeding before we do it. So similarly here, I'm very much in favor, particularly since this is going to be a process that continues to have involvement, and we might argue is more involved in the next 5 or 6 months than in the 5 or 6 weeks in the last 5 or 6. Appreciate the opportunity to have the chief and other enforcement people look at it and have some conversations with. I would agree with the chief, and I've had the same conversation at times with input to a representative of the council, so that another reason, as you all know, who participate in public meetings, you may say something that during the process of the meeting, one of us said something that we decide really wasn't a good idea at all. That's not the kind of thing you want to do in a public televised phone meeting necessarily, right? You need to be able to kind of talk it through. So those are my inputs. Absolutely willing to facilitate that process. Thank you.
All right, may I,
I'm sorry, Andre, go ahead.
did you have a comment on that?
I did.
Yes.
Go ahead. Ken, yes?
No, I didn't. Go ahead,
Someone who was just speaking? Bill?
Ben.
Sven.
Sven?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Sven.
So Andre, so Andre, to your point, I think first of all, the chief, this was sent to the chief earlier today, more so as a heads up. I think we've all learned a lot, and you brought a lot of those points up. I think if the council feels like a next step, and I'm going to go back to the framework, 4.2 would be allowing trades on the island so they can prep businesses, office people 1 to 2 going back, these isolated visit businesses like radon cleaning, movers, that kind of thing. If everybody's thinking that's good next step, then I think that's what we should ask Jim, EMA, the doctors, the chief, of course, harbors, to all craft around, and let's figure out how we deal with that. It's very hard for them to react when they don't know what it is we're talking. So my hope is that the framework allows us to talk about it in blocks and, to Martha's earliest comment, small steps. So I would like to say allow trades onto the island, which is that bullet in 4.3, move that up to 4.2. Ask Kathy to start to craft that up. We can talk about it at the next meeting, but also ask Jim to lead a discussion with a small group as to how does one deal with enforcement and what are the ramifications, and how do we modify that so that we address everything, Andre, you just talked about. And I think that's a clear next step. I'm trying to get us to get to an actionable place here.
Ken?
Arthur, go ahead.
Okay, so instead of all of this, why don't we just put those in essential workers? Wouldn't that make it a lot easier?
How we do it,
I think a lot of, hold on, wait a minute, please let me finish. I think a lot of essential workers were from the mainland, and they were, whatever ones we could think of or were brought to our attention. I also want to say, I think when we first, from where I'm sitting, when we first did this ordinance, the main objective was to stop the traffic. And it ended up shutting down the island only because I don't think any of us saw any way of saying you could work here if you were local, but you couldn't work here if you weren't. And I mean, that's just the reality. We were trying to stem the flow of traffic from the mainland and try to contain whatever was going on. I think that was the real objective in the beginning, and now we're trying to work out of this. But I'm not sure. I think all of these. Sometimes I think there's some things that could be a lot more simple than we're making them. And I do think that obviously I think obviously discretion is a huge part of the police officers' work, and I do remember everybody being at the first meeting. I'm finished.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you.
Comments?
Real quick, Ken, if I can, I won't speak for counselors, but having gone through this whole process, it's been a balance that you have all been trying to strike between putting people in an essential category, because essential category confers different, shall we say, movement permission. And maybe we're getting to the point where the distinction isn't as great, but I think that's been the resistance to making an appraiser an essential worker. And I think, not having thought it through necessarily in the new reality to any great length, but I think I would come down on the side of keeping them distinct, but allowing an off-island service provider, as is listed, to come on and off, and then also allow trades onto the island so they can prep. I'm not sure I'll feel this way after thinking about it for 24 hours or 48, but I think for right now, the distinctions still are providing a useful approach for us. Thanks.
Andre?
Jim, yeah. That's thinking out loud. That's great. And that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, you like you just said, you might change your mind after 24 hours. This is like what I'm saying is that we need to discuss this with your staff, figure out enforcement, figure out shortfalls, figure out strong points, and then present this to us instead of this frenetic policy that we keep seeming to have to go through. We're into 2 hours already discussing this, and we're not going to come to an answer. And I get we're hashing it out, but this is what I'm trying to say is would be nice if could be done at the town hall before we come to these meetings.
Thank you. Sven?
I was going to say, if we're all, or at least enough of us are in agreement, I think that, I don't know if it's a motion, Ken, but I think if we bump that allowed trades up into 4.2 to ask everything Andre just said, Jim and staff and others, to put a plan together as to how to do 4.2 and how to modify it and how to put people in different categories, and then have Kathy draft something up that we can talk about at the next meeting. That would be my recommendation as the next step.
The next meeting will be probably Monday if we go by our regular schedule. Is everyone thinking Monday?
Fine.
Monday's fine.
Jim, is that something doable for Monday?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. I'll entertain a motion.
Okay, I make a motion that we ask the interim town manager and related staff, et cetera, to put a plan together and review enforcement, registration, operations of the following: increased working activities to include office, 1 to 2 people in a business office, isolated visit business as detailed in the framework, and allowing trades onto the island so they can prep businesses. Second, I would ask Kathy, once Jim sort of works through some of those little details, to draft up a rough addendum to the ordinance so that we can all talk about it and discuss and act on it at the next meeting.
Can I ask for clarification on that?
Go ahead.
All right, so it says off-island service providers and it has a colon. It says radon, cleaning, movers, delivery, appraisal, legal, and etc. So if we're gonna put this into an ordinance, I'd rather have that all defined about what we're going to allow.
You mean no, et cetera?
No, etc.
Yeah, no, we kill the et cetera. My hope is that then Jim and the group can say, oh, there's also X, and we would kill et cetera. You're right, Andre. Yes.
So what is your motion to allow?
increasing working activities to include office, 1 to 2 people per business office. This isolated visit business, which would include office island business providers, radon cleaning, movers, delivery, appraisal, legal, and if Jim adds anything in the next 24 hours. And then third is allow trades onto the island so they can, appropriate trades, and we can define that if we need, allow trades onto the island so they can prep the businesses so that the next step within the framework can be attended to.
Okay, so you're asked, I'm asking these questions for clarification. So you're moving 1 bullet point out of 4.3 up to 4.2, just the top bullet point.
Yes, sir.
Allow trades onto the island so they can prep the businesses.
Yes,
I'm okay. I would.
that's what the motion is.
Well, I would say that, okay. I'll second the motion for discussion.
Andre seconds Sven's motion for discussion.
But I'm not committing to voting on it, though. I just want to discuss that allow trades onto the island so they can prep the businesses. So you're basically saying in your motion that you only want to have trades come out to prep businesses. This wouldn't allow an electrician to come out and be someone else's sub, even if they're from Rhode Island, or, you know what I mean? Like, I just,
Yes, I agree. This is about the sequencing you and Jim talked about an hour ago, which was, or sorry, Chris and Jim talked about, which was, we got to prep the businesses so that we can start that 3 to 4 week minimum housing inspection process to therefore be able at some time give a go ahead.
okay,
So
so
it's
this
a
is,
sequencing. So all it's doing is allowing that plumber or that AC person to come over and work at the National or the Spring House or whatever it may be.
okay, for discussion. All right.
Any other comments or questions? All right,
I just think Andre made a very good point on subs not being allowed to come out to work on local construction projects for local contractors being able to come out to work at a hotel. I hope I understand,
Agreed.
not misunderstanding that.
all right. I'll call-
Well,
Any other comments?
I would say put it in there. We can vote to have this discussed. We don't have to vote to actually do it next time we meet. We're just looking for a plan on these topics right now, a plan, and we're not setting a date to execute
correct.
this. So for the discussion, but I mean, I think if you're going to allow, businesses to come out to prep the businesses, you're gonna have to allow subs to come out for the contractors. And I don't know if I'm totally there yet, but with allowing this many people to come back, however, I'll move the motion forward for the discussion for the town manager to hash it out with the staff.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, Chris?
Aye, just so we can move this on.
Exactly.
Andre?
Aye, so we can move on.
Martha? Martha?
She must be Martha.
I'm talking to a mute. I'm talking to a muted screen. Aye, so we can move on.
Sven?
Aye.
I vote aye, 5 affirmative. All right. The other thing on this, and I guess it's something we may want to take up at our next meeting also, is there's been a discussion about under health, safety, and welfare management. There has been a discussion about the event planning and outdoor licensing and things like that, outdoor entertainment licenses for the summer. Now, some of that's going to be controlled by what the state does, and we can't be any more lenient than the state, only more restrictive. I guess if you want, we can put that on a discussion at the next meeting in terms of what to do about that, unless you want to have that discussion now. Any feelings? Stan, what are you showing me?
No, that was sort of level 2. But I think the governor actually already talked about major events being canceled, 50 people. I think a lot, and 4th of July, basically, I think she said parades are off. So I think it's good to discuss and have an agenda next meeting. And I think between the state and us, we're going to pretty much eliminate all of it.
Okay, we can shake it out next meeting then. Any other comments on that?
The only thing that I would add to that is a clarification. I think you say gather more than 50. Is everybody else kind of beeping? Is that just me?
Yeah.
That we need a clarification. Is this 50 people for a special event or 50 people for anything? And
Right,
we
50
need
people.
to get that from upstate
Well,
to be sure we know what we're talking about.
right,
50 people's 50 people.
yeah, but we
Well,
don't-
I want to be sure because it seems to be couched in the terms of events, special events, and all of that. I just want to be really clear because that's going to have a huge impact on a lot of businesses if that's the number.
well, but
Andre?
I just want to be sure we all know what we're talking about. That's
All
all.
right, thank you, Martha. Andre?
yeah, Martha, and just to, I know you don't forget this and you know this wholly, but we still have the outdoor entertainment licenses being upheld. So if that's something that we just don't think is right for us, we can take action on that.
Well, that's a moot point. I'm not talking about outdoor entertainment. I'm talking about gatherings at the beach. I'm talking about crowds at the marinas. I'm talking about that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I get it. I was thinking in terms of, outdoor music and country and western festivals.
Well, those are out. That's clear.
All right, any need to discuss and act on the amendment emergency ordinances at this meeting? We talked about moving ahead with that on the next meeting, right? So I don't think there's any
Oh,
need.
we got 2 hours in here. That's enough.
Can I ask a question?
No, not at the moment. Hold on. Is it pertinent to this item?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
I just want to know, I'm not supposed to do this drafting until I've heard back from the town manager regarding his meetings with staff and input. And at that point, I'm supposed to incorporate that input into Sven's proposed items.
As far as I know, we're going to see that input and then we're going to direct you what to put in that item.
Okay, so I should draft it now then, not wait.
I think you're part of that team that's going to advise us. No?
Okay.
Anybody
Yeah.
else? Right?
Well, then the difference is one way I would draft it specifically incorporating what you've discussed today. The other way I would draft it is incorporating what you discussed today with the input of the people on the team. And wait for that before I draft it.
Sven?
My hope, Kathy, would be that Jim is able to give you that feedback early enough so that you could have it for the meeting on Monday. If not, let's not waste your efforts. And hopefully Jim can get it to you. So on Monday, we can both get Jim's feedback and the staff, as well as your proposed draft to approve or edit or reject.
And may I have a minute on the topic? We've received a few emails and we've received emails. I don't know, but I feel as though it's an important question that needs to be asked is, I guess the food pantry today saw a lot of seasonal workers already here and living in congested conditions. And they had to go out for food and they went to the food pantry today. So, I mean, I don't know anything about that, but apparently there's already workers coming and living together and heading out for food. So can somebody please look into this and realistically give us an answer? Honestly, give us an answer?
Yeah. This isn't meant as an answer. We've had, and the answer to that question is yes. We will try to we'll make an effort to ascertain if the people have just gotten here, if they've been here all along. I've been at the Wednesday morning food pantry very briefly last week or a couple weeks ago. I think it was last week. And there's been a steady increase. but we'll do some research on that, and we'll make every effort to get something to Kathy. I think Kathy, the things that are in here, you could work as a framework, but we'll communicate tomorrow about that. Thanks.
All right. So if you can find out where these workers have come from, who they're working for, and where they're staying, because obviously this is a public health concern that we're trying to handle here, and we're spending 2 hours talking about it, and apparently it's already happened.
Well, let's make sure we know exactly what's happened, because I think we've gotten secondhand or third-hand information. And there may be an increase also because people aren't able to get off island. People are having there's a huge backup on Peapod. So I want to be sure we know what we're talking about.
I get
If
it.
we can get definitive. And I know what you're saying, Andre, but let's find out for sure.
That's what I'm asking. I want to find out for sure.
Yep.
Fine. Another issue? Andre?
Can I just ask Bill McComb a question on the topic? Is he here or is he falling asleep on us? Bill McComb, are you here?
Yeah, go ahead, Andre.
Hey, Bill. I just, while we're at this meeting, it's come up, and I personally have the question is, what, how's the ferry? What's the social distancing thoughts? I mean, obviously, we have to address this. That's the mode of transportation to bring a lot of people here, and the governor's saying anybody under 50. I think the question we have to ask is, where does the ferry fall in this? Gatherings over 50 aren't allowed. How's that pan out for transportation? Social distancing, we don't know about yet. Like, has there been any talk on that end about, what you're actually going to do?
Yeah, actually, we've addressed that quite a bit. We're looking at, doing a strategic plan. And right now, we only can plan on 2 weeks at a time because everything is so fluid and changes so fast. So while we plan for 2 weeks, and social gathering certainly is not an issue, since our average capacity has been under 15 passengers for the last 6 weeks. The most people we had on the boat on our busiest day, including drivers, was 38. So currently, under the scenario we have now, social distancing is not an issue. However, that doesn't mean we're not looking at 30 days out and looking at 60 days out, and what the difference, will look like then. Some of the measures that we can do. Realistically, there's a difference between transportation and someone who elects to go to a concert and so forth. So we're looking at all the options that we have at that end of it. A lot of those options, I'm sure, will include education and cooperation with people. So it's fluid as we tend to ramp up here, or tick up, we should call it. We're going to make those adjustments, and we'll keep you in the loop.
All right, thanks. Because, it is obviously, as we move forward, we're talking, people are concerned about large influxes of people coming here in the summer. But, if we're looking at the ferry and you have to socially distance, 6 feet, it is going to be a lot less ridership, I would imagine. And, I mean, just from my own knowledge, like social distancing and large groups, do you right now know if that includes transportation? Because I know there's some exceptions to some of these things.
I think it'd be premature for me to give you that answer.
Right. Okay.
However, on the same token, I can tell you I can tell you this: it's in the forefront of our planning, and we're working with all the agencies, not only the town, from the ferry standpoint, has worked very closely with the governor's office and the Coast Guard, Passenger Vessels Association, which is also putting out information. So this is something that's being looked at throughout the industry, and we're going to make whatever adjustments that we can in order to make it as safe as we can.
Exactly. And this is, I think that goes to what I was asking for Jim is like, as part of that team that's advising us, is that something that is, you could bring to the table, in those discussions?
Let me jump in quickly, Andre. Public transportation, and everybody knows this is a private, but PUC regulated transportation, but public transportation like buses and the like have been exempted from some of the other rules so that people can continue, particularly essential people, can continue to use them. That's been true in Rhode Island and other places. And to the extent that Bill McComb and Interstate have kind of general approaches that they're looking at, with his permission, we can include that in any advice and advisory to the council. Bill has, again, things move quickly, but Bill has made an effort to keep me and Ken informed, although there really hasn't, as everybody knows, hasn't been much change in about 4 weeks. So there hasn't really been much to inform people about. But, I think potentially we're looking at we had a pretty steep slope going down the hill. We hopefully are looking at a little bit of an incline coming out. And so we'll include that obviously in any kind of communication to the extent that it's appropriate.
Right.
And I mean from their side.
Right. And I know that's, I get it. I'm just trying to keep on top of, it's a major issue. And I would appreciate that. I appreciate Bill's been keeping you and Ken informed on that. It's just, I wish, if you could include the council, that would be great in the future.
Any other emails you want to discuss, Andre?
No.
All right. Any other?
Unless Molly has any.
What?
Unless Molly has any new ones that came in. I don't know. I think we got them all. Oh, is Mark Tilson here?
Yes, he is.
Mark Tilson?
Hello.
Mark, are you in? Mark Tilson?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you talk to me 1 second about the employee housing rooming house licenses? Is there anybody? Are those all empty right now?
Are they
you know?
all empty? Not that I'm, the information I have is some of them have employees in them. I've heard the Overlook, the Manasees, and I know they have some employees in them.
Okay, and that's all good with the town and whatnot? That's all legit?
Not necessarily, without getting into a lot of detail, because it might be a legal issue. I prepared notices of violation and discussed this with Catherine. And under the ordinance, the revised ordinances of the New Shoreham, it's something that is not enforced by my office. It's not a building code issue, nor is it a zoning issue.
So I think there's a roundabout way of you saying there's people living illegally in some of these places and you can't do anything about it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, I would like to be able to do something about it, but under the revised ordinance of the New Shoreham, I am not the enforcing officer.
Okay. Jim, can you talk to us about that?
This isn't something that we've worked through as a group, and it's something that we probably need to work through in a conversation so that we can understand what the actual facts and circumstances are.
Okay.
All right.
Yep, I'm just gonna circle back to, we have these plans about reopening and it's, trying to keep people safe and, apparently this is going on and we know about it. So, that's a little opening to the envelope, as Dr. Clark, I think, would refer to that as, and I will let you do your job on that and hopefully, this will be addressed.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Next item on the agenda is discuss an act to have town manager search committee resume candidate interviews via telecommunications. The search committee had to discontinue interviews because of the COVID-19 crisis. Now that the OMA guidelines are opened up for other than essential meetings, emergency meetings, they can be had via telecommunications. There's been a suggestion that we have the interviews along those lines. Chris, do you have anything on that?
I'm sure.
Go ahead.
I should point out that all but one, we've had 3 interviews so far prior to us having to stop temporarily. All of them but one were conducted via telecommunications. That's an option everybody has had. But there's 4 more interviews to conduct. And now that we are permitted to resume normal business, we'd like to reach out to the remaining candidates and see if we can move forward with the remaining interviews. All the individuals that are on the search committee said yes. We had 4 said yes, 1 wasn't in a hurry, and the 3rd said whatever the council, or the last person said whatever the council wants. So 4 out of the 5 definitely want to move forward, and the 5th is whatever the council wants. So
I'll make a motion to have the town manager search committee resume candidate interviews via telecommunications.
Second.
Seconded by Andre. Any discussion further?
Okay, Ken,
Ben, go ahead.
just discussion on this point, but really for the next meeting, I'd love to have an agenda item about all committees and town organizations being able to resume meetings that were stopped. So if you can, in concert to this one, all the other ones, in my opinion, should be able to start back up by either Zoom or social distance.
Chris Willie?
and I want to build on what Sven just said. And, the town can resume business, and for about a month now, we've kind of known that this Zoom platform or these telecommunications or video conferencing was going to be the format in which we were going to have to do business for quite a while. So I want to hear next week or whenever this update is given that Sven just asked how we're going to do that, because I'm a little, I'm questioning why it takes 3 consultants to run this meeting, and no offense to these 3 consultants, they're all good people. But we have an entire staff that's on a limited work schedule or some type of administrative leave. I don't know what it's being called right now. And for the 6 weeks, how many of them have actually been engaged in actually taking these Zoom or whatever platform we're going to use? I'm assuming it's Zoom. How many have been engaged and actually asked to sit in on the numerous free webinars and mechanisms to learn the platform, so that when these people have to start going back to work, know how to use it? Because from what I understand, I don't think it's happened. And I have a problem just relying on IT, again, no offense to Michelle, to actually have to run all these. I think it's inefficient, expensive, and not necessary. Somebody with a high school education can do a Zoom meeting. In fact, I can't tell you how many I've had with family members or various other friends. It's not hard. And, I understand it's different at a town council level, but we have a number of other small committees that we don't need to pay an hourly consultant to sit in on. And I'd like to know, or at least ask the town manager to have some type of strategy or plan moving forward, because this is going to be the way of doing business, looks like, for a while. And I'm not in favor of having a bunch of consultants running the meetings when we have perfectly capable town employees that can do it. And again, it's no offense to them, but it's like these people are here to work, and you know, they're fully capable of doing it. I mean, how many boards and commissions do we have? It's ridiculous. We got to figure out an efficient way to do this, especially if it's for even 2-3 months. So I'd like to see that plan, you know, at least developed.
All right, we can follow up on that on the next meeting or another meeting. All those in favor of the motion, Sven?
Aye.
Andre?
Sure.
Chris?
Aye.
Martha?
Aye.
I vote in the affirmative. Motion carries 5-0. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded by Andre. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Martha? Ben? Willie? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.